Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. The sun's out. It's a gorgeous day. I've got my coffee. I'm getting good Brianne vibes here this morning for us all. She is on her well-deserved vacation. So excited to see you all here, and I know she'll be looking forward to coming back here in 2 weeks. Because you hopefully noticed we're going to take a break next week for the 4th of July holiday. So then we'll reconvene on July 6th. But it's so good to see everyone popping on here this morning. We're going to start out, of course, as we do every week. We're going to begin with the main room kind of presentation, and we're excited. We've got Nikki Severson and Connie Isaacson talking about fundraising strategies in this time. And then after their presentation, about 9 o'clock or so, we'll of course have the opportunity to go into some breakout rooms for smaller group discussions. And we're thrilled to have kind of 3 options for you this morning. One, if you want to stick around in the main room, we've got the chance to have additional discussion with Connie and Nikki, so you can ask some more questions that you might have and just brainstorm together. We'll also talk about, I'll be in there, so if you have any questions about adaptation grants that are due this Friday, and then I can also give you a little bit more information, from the Community Foundation side of things. And then of course, we've got our 2 smaller breakout room options for you. So grateful for Jenna Ekstrom with Habitat. She's going to talk about some successes and some work that they've been doing in peer-to-peer fundraising. You all know the importance of leveraging networks of folks who love your organization. So Habitat's been doing some great work in this time, and so she's going to talk about some of those ideas. And then in room 2, we are grateful to have Sonia Ash with Young Women's Resource Center joining us to talk about just some fundraising pivots that they've been doing in this time, and especially thankful as one of their biggest pivots, changing their in-person gala to virtual, is actually happening Saturday. So she is jumping in at what is a very busy time, but you'll get in-the-moment feedback and opportunity for conversation. So those will be our breakout rooms. Again, room 1 is the peer-to-peer idea. And so if you'd like to attend that, please put it in front of your name. And then if you'd like to have a conversation around fundraising pivots, that's room 2. So please indicate that in front of your name as well. All right, I think we've got maybe a couple more here to let in. So I'll wait here just a moment. Our dear friend, Brianne, who you all see, is probably a much more energetic Wednesday morning welcomer for you all. She indicated last week, I think she shared with all of you, one of her life goals of running a marathon. And for those who haven't seen on her social media post, she did complete that. It's amazing. She did that on Saturday by herself, the solo run. So we're so excited for her. And another thing checked off of her bucket list. So that's exciting. We're happy for her. All right. Well, it looks like maybe we've slowed down a little bit with folks joining. So let's go ahead and kick off this morning. Bridget, can you just go back one more time for me for that first slide? I just want to be sure. Just a reminder, we're going to have everyone mute themselves so it's easier to hear. If you want to leave your camera off until we get to those breakout rooms, that will also be helpful, at least for the first half of the conversation. And as I said, as folks were gathering, you'll have 3 opportunities this morning. You can stay in the main room for more conversation with our presenters, Nikki Severson and Connie Isaacson, or you can choose one of 2 breakout rooms. We'll have a conversation around peer-to-peer fundraising or helping individuals who love your organization leverage their networks to support your work. And then we'll also have an opportunity to talk about fundraising pivots, including in the real-time moment of turning a gala into a virtual event. So you can choose that for room 2. Okay, Bridget, if you can move along for us, thank you so much. So over the past few months, which have seemed like years and decades even at times, the nonprofit sector has faced a lot. You've all pivoted in just unimaginable ways, but yet always staying true to your mission. And as we all know, it takes money to make the mission work. And fundraising in a time like this can be challenging. But one of the things I think that many of us have learned is that it also gives us a chance to really dig into what matters in terms of those relationships. So we're really grateful to have friends of the nonprofit sector here for sure, with Isaacson Severson Consulting, here to talk about fundraising in a pandemic. And this cartoon on the screen was given to us this morning by Brianne to really show us some fairy tales for board members. This idea that a bedtime story for a board member might read, so the wealthy philanthropist fell in love with the Cinderella organization and funded it ever after. And as much as that's the story we'd like to hear again and again, we know that we have to plan for many things in good times and in times of challenge like the one that we're in. So Bridget, I'd like to have you advance the slide, please. And with that, I would love to welcome Connie Isaacson and Nikki Severson to turn on their video. And I'm going to turn it over to them to help us explore more about fundraising during this time. Thank you so much. Great to see you both.
Thanks, Angie.
Yes, and good morning to all. I speak for Nikki and myself in saying that we're really pleased to be here with you this morning. We have a lot of passion for the community, just as all of you who are attending this morning have a lot of passion for our community. So we'd like to share with you what we learned from a past Great Recession and to talk a bit about the environment we're in today and how we can continue to have success in that environment. So next slide, please. So a little bit about who we are, although we won't spend time on this at all. I know many of you that are on the call today, and many of you know Nikki and me. We're always pleased to meet new people. I think the message we want to give you is that we're nonprofit partners, and we're in this work with you together, that we have a lot of passion. I've been doing this for more than 25 years, and Nikki's been involved for more than 15 years. We believe we live in a great community, in a great area, and that the nonprofits are really what provide so much quality and value plus to this area. So we're really committed along with you. So the outcomes that we'd like to accomplish today, we'd like to talk just a little bit about what we learned from the last recession. It's always important to reflect on what's happened in the past and how can we take the best of that and move forward and learn from it. We're going to talk about communicating to key audiences during COVID-19. What does that mean? What are some specific strategies for that? And then we're going to talk about timing considerations for your annual funds and campaigns and days of action that might help you move things forward. So those are our outcomes for this morning. So lessons learned from the last recession. I'd start by saying, where were you in 2008 when that last Great Recession began? What do you remember about it? What did it feel like? For me personally, in 2008, I was just beginning my brand new business, Isaacson Consulting, and I was filled with lots of optimism regarding this new adventure to help numerous nonprofits in our community. And then the crash occurred. So as you may recall, 8.8 million jobs were lost, the GDP fell by 4%, home prices dropped by 30%. Sounds pretty familiar, right, to what's happening now, although the numbers now are even greater. What I expected at that time then was that all the business that I had at that point would quickly disappear. But much to my surprise, that didn't happen. And just like today, in 2008, nonprofit missions became even more vitally important, and nonprofit financial resources became severely strained. So I would say those are two things that are happening and repeating themselves in 2020. The small nonprofits and the new nonprofits at that time suffered the most. And then what was surprising is that my business to support nonprofits actually got really busy. I was shocked because I thought the business would go away. So why would that happen, you might ask? And it happened for a couple of reasons. First, because savvy nonprofit leaders knew that this was a time to refocus and plan, that the landscape had actually shifted and they knew they needed to pivot to respond to the new landscape. And a consultant could help them with that planning and refocusing. The second thing is because nonprofits who could no longer afford the ongoing cost of salaries and benefits for a new position, even though they may have needed a new position greatly, could carve out some one-time dollars to use a consultant to help fill the gaps until the economy rebounded. So that's what happened. Those were my surprises. Let's look then at a bit of the historical perspective and what we have learned in the 12 years between 2008 and 2020. First thing I want to mention is that this is really not apples to apples. The Great Recession of 2008 was an economic crisis, and it resulted in lost jobs and increased poverty and more persons unable to access things like healthcare. The pandemic, on the other hand, began as a health crisis. So one began as an economic crisis. This one began as a health crisis that has now impacted all other aspects of our daily life and a secondary severe economic crisis. So one of the biggest differences between the two is that the Great Recession of 2008 did not require isolation, did not require a quarantine situation. And so as disheartening and difficult as 2008 was, we could still meet with donors in person, we could still conduct meetings together, and we could be in public spaces. However, there are similarities between 2008 and 2020. The recession of 2008 and the pandemic of 2020 have both caused a great increase in community needs, from food to housing, basic services to access to healthcare. And both the recession of 2008 and the pandemic of 2020 have made the missions of nonprofit organizations like yours more important than ever. Next slide, please. So what did we learn? And what happened? In the recession of 2008, giving decreased. It dropped 3.7% in 2008 and a whopping 8.3% in 2009. Small nonprofits and new nonprofits suffered the most, and a few didn't survive. But the positive is people's generous spirits remained. They really wanted and did respond to the heightened need for social services and healthcare, and scholarships and supports for those in need. And fortunately, the decrease in giving was short-lived. Philanthropy bounced back when the economy bounced back, and it bounced back more quickly than any of the experts had predicted. So by 2014, giving had surpassed the pre-recession levels. So that's a very important point for us to remember now. We also learned that the economic downturn does not justify throwing out what has worked in the past. And we observed that nonprofits became even more important during this time. We learned that people-centric giving had to be a priority. And those nonprofits in 2008 to 2010 that survived and ended stronger kept relationships as their primary focus. They remembered that donors want to hear from organizations' top executives. They want to hear the president or the CEO or the executive director's perspective on the crisis. They remember that the number one reason donors stop giving to a particular charity is because they no longer feel connected to that charity or to that organization. So they stayed in touch even during tough times when it would have been so easy to go into isolation mode and just say, we don't have much to tell our donors. They evaluated their return on investment regularly, in business terms, the ROI. In other words, they fished where the big fish are. They stayed engaged with their major donors and put their time and energy there. They made sure their donors knew the impact the organization continued to make during the Great Depression and in such a very difficult time. And they were cognizant of not putting all of their fundraising eggs in one basket. They diversified their approaches to fundraising, but always gave top priority to major donor relationships and where the greatest return on investment could be found. So in summary, I would say during the Great Recession of 2008, planning and relationships allowed many of the nonprofit organizations to not only survive during the time, but to thrive again. Next slide, please.
Okay, and now we're going to jump in and talk about exactly how do you build those relationships and really what are those key components to communication. So the most important thing for nonprofits to remember and to do right now is communicate, communicate, communicate. I think Connie and I say that more than on a daily basis. So what are those keys to communication? The first thing that we want you to remember is authenticity. We are all going through this pandemic together and everyone is impacted. And so in your communications, be as authentic as possible. Donors will be able to tell if you're not being authentic, and they're also truly going to appreciate your vulnerability and your honesty. Also, as Connie just said, relationship building is critical during this time. The gifts might be lower, but you've still got to have that constant communication and building those relationships with those donors. As you build that trust and keep that line of communication open, donors will remember that. And so as the economy bounces back, their gifts will continue to bounce back and even increase as well. The other thing to keep in mind is to show your impact. These donors cared about your organization before the pandemic. So odds are they still really care about what you're doing right now. So make sure that you show how your organization is adapting and continuing to meet the need. And then also with strategic communication, you can show your relevancy. Don't veer from your mission, but again, how are you still a part of this sphere that we're in right now? Okay, next slide. So we also want to touch on segmenting your communications because one blanket communication is not going to cut it right now. And so let's look at some of your different donor groups, kind of starting with that inside circle. And that first is your board of directors. Inform them early and inform them often. Your board are your biggest advocates, your biggest cheerleaders. So the more information that you arm them with, the more they're going to be able to help you. If you haven't already, consider a scheduled board update every Friday, every Monday, every other week, just because in between those board meetings, there is a lot going on and you are tackling a lot and pivoting every day. And so keeping your board members informed so then they can be your advocates out in the community. Also, when you look at your corporate donors and your foundation donors, they have been impacted as well. And so reach out to them on a personal basis and just see how they're doing. Again, it's relationship building, but there's also the flip side of that where you can find out a little bit more about where that corporate donor is at or where that foundation is. And as you have that conversation about how they are doing, that might give you some insight about your future giving. Use that opportunity to thank them, to show your appreciation, and then hopefully then they'll open the door for them to say, hey, and now how are you doing and how's your nonprofit? And you can share the impact that you're still having right now and the needs that you have right now as well. Same thing can be said for your major donors. Pick up the phone, call, talk to them. How are you doing? Where are you at right now? Did you stay at your winter home? Are you summering already? Again, you'll be building those relationships, but also getting a sense of where is your donor base feeling? What's their impact been economically, financially? Have they been hit really hard or are they still doing okay? So you can, have a sense of where your annual fund has a chance to go, right? And then again, hopefully they'll open that door so you can then share how your organization is doing. And then don't forget your entire donor base, keeping that whole stakeholder group engaged, informed. If you are a organization that centers around volunteers, don't forget your volunteers. They are a key group as well, and they need to be communicated with a little bit differently. But think about how those regular communications can be sent and tailored to your different donor groups. Next, Bridget. Okay. So then we're going to talk about how we communicate. These Zoom calls are incredibly handy and very, very helpful. However, we are all on a lot of Zoom calls a day. So think a little bit outside the Zoom box when you're thinking about communicating with your donors. as I mentioned before, phone calls really do go a long way, especially with your major donors. We would also recommend handwritten notes. That the power of getting something in the mail, especially in today's age, really is helpful for your donors. It shows that you care. And it's really hard too, though, right? You are putting out how many fires during the day. So one thing we would recommend is put 5 note cards on your desk at the beginning of the week, and then just kind of work your way through them as a reminder to really do those personal touches with your individual, corporate, and foundation donors who need that the most. Another thing to consider, back to the Zoom arena, would be a donor forum. There are a handful of organizations in town who have invited their stakeholder groups in for a really open, honest conversation about where is the organization, how the organization is doing, and what does the future hold. And they've allowed donors to be able to ask those hard questions, and they'll answer them. So again, it's that vulnerability, it's that authenticity, but it's giving that donor that inside sense, and also the chance to show your donors what your needs truly are that you might not be able to communicate in an email. And then again, looking at those emails, targeted e-communications really can be great, especially as you're looking at your broader donor base. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about timing. Timing is everything. So we're going to walk through kind of the different ways that timing impacts your efforts. And Connie will start first with the annual fund.
Sure. There's 4 words I'd like you to remember. And in regard to the annual fund, those 4 words are can't stop, won't stop. Remember those important words. You cannot stop working on your annual fund because this is what keeps the lights on and the operations going and the programs intact. You may have to adjust this year's budget, and you may have to adjust your board's expectations for this year, but you absolutely cannot stop making the ask. This is where the communication strategies that Nikki just talked to you about will come into play. Capital campaigns, however, can stop and sometimes will stop. In fact, many in our area have paused since March. If we look at it carefully, we believe most in our area who were in capital campaigns have paused since March. And determining whether to continue a campaign or pause a campaign has a lot to do with the phase the campaign was in prior to the beginning of the pandemic. Were you in the planning phase before COVID-19 began, or did you already have major donor and leadership commitments? Were you just about to cross the finish line, or were you just beginning? If you're further along, you don't want to lose the momentum that you had built. And evaluate what's left to raise, where your remaining prospects are, and if you've had good communication with them, you'll kind of have a sense where your remaining prospects are. And then think about how you might need to pivot your plans to move this forward across the finish line. Secondly, evaluate your donor base when you're trying to make that decision. Is your focus for the campaign on individual contributions or corporate contributions or public dollars? As we all know, I believe, public dollars have been impacted dramatically. Polk County, Prairie Meadows, those sources we relied on very heavily and who were very generous, their grants are on hold for the remainder of 2020. Corporations have also been hit hard by the pandemic and could be putting their dollars solely into disaster and crisis relief right now. Or they may not even feel it's prudent to commit to large multi-year pledge payments right now or pledges right now. So evaluate that donor base. If your campaign is basically based on individual support and you know a lot about those individuals and how they're feeling right now, you may be more likely to move forward. If your campaign is based solely on public support and corporate support, you will need to evaluate very carefully when the timing will be right to go again. And then evaluate what your donors think, your volunteer leaders think. The #1 predictor of campaign success is the strength of your volunteer leadership. So be sure to include those key volunteers in the decisions related to continuing or pausing your campaign. They'll be an excellent barometer of your donor base. Making sure they're on board and on the same page is really critical to success. So don't begin to make changes to your campaign without engaging your key volunteer leadership. And then keep in mind that with careful evaluation and perhaps a refocusing and the ability to pivot, even if it's just a bit, campaigns can thrive during turbulent times. I like Helen Keller's quote that says, "A bend in the road is not the end of the road unless you fail to make the turn." So I think the wisdom here is, yes, we've had a bend in the road, but it doesn't have to be the end of the road for your campaign if you can make a turn, if you can pivot, if you can evaluate carefully, if you can figure out where you were in the process, then I think the timing for moving forward will become apparent to you.
And then the other thing to think about is days of action. We've seen this a lot where there's a focused giving day. And how do you know what's the right time for that day and for that planning, especially as we are seeing things change on a daily, weekly basis right now? So the first thing I'd ask you to consider is relevancy. Is this something that you always do at the same time every year? Or is this, would the day be marking something in your history, or something that is in current events? So think about that and what's the relevancy of this day with your organization and why it's a day of giving. And then with everything right now, you've got to be flexible. So think of that date, but also be ready to move it if necessary. There's a university in central Iowa that had to move their day of giving 3 times. First, because it was right when the pandemic was hitting and it didn't quite seem like the right time. Then they rescheduled, and George Floyd's murder happened, which would have also not been a good time to activate a big day of giving. And so then they pivoted again. And part of that flexibility also shows that you're receptive. You do not want your donors to think that you're tone deaf to what is happening in current events, because then that's going to be worse for your organization. So how is that day relevant? How are you being flexible in your planning? And then are you being receptive to what's happening around you? So next slide, Bridget. Really, in conclusion, the things that Connie and I just want you to remember and just to kind of help guide you through this really crazy world that we're living in right now is, number one, stay true to your mission. Make sure you're communicating often and that you're communicating in an authentic manner. And also, this is a time to be creative, just like how Sonia is about to talk about in one of the breakout rooms, how YWRC is switching to a couched event. How can you be creative? And also, how can you take this time to think about things that maybe weren't working well, but you were just doing it because it was status quo? This is a time where you've got, the opportunity to think about things differently and how can it move your organization forward. And then lastly, we just want you to also stay positive. It can be really hard to be fundraising in this time right now. And so look for the silver linings, whether it's the fact that thanks to Zoom, we don't have to drive back and forth to meetings, or half of us are wearing shorts right now. Think about those silver linings, stay positive, and know that we will rebound from this.
And I would just add that remember what we did learn from 2008, and that is that people's generous spirits remain and that giving will rebound as soon as the economy rebounds, and that people have great respect and admiration for the work you're doing in helping to meet such critical needs today.
Thank you so much, Connie and Nikki. I was taking lots of notes. I'm sure folks on the call, some things are just great reminders for us. And I think especially in this time, just to hear some of what you've seen in terms of success in the conversations with clients and nonprofits that you're working with. I especially appreciated too, Connie, the reflection back to 2008. That's, I think really what a lot of us are holding on to in terms of how can we take that information and apply it to today. And I wanted to just share a couple of things from the Community Foundation's perspective, because as you all know, our role is really to promote charitable giving and help connect people to causes they care about. That's our mission in the community, to really help all the nonprofits meet theirs. And we say time and time again how generous this place is. And there's a lot of need out there, so I don't want to skip over that. But I did want folks to know, in terms of the community foundation, even the donor advised funds that we have here, we have seen incredible generosity. To give you a sense, this year in 2020 over 2019, we've seen about a 35% increase in giving from donor advised funds out to charitable organizations. So, again, that doesn't mean that there isn't need and great need at the organizations right now. But I just wanted to share that we continue to share the message with donor advised funds and the community at large about the critical role of giving right now. And I think that's just something that we can hold on to, that spirit of generosity. I think also there was a survey done of some donor advised funds, and in particularly with Fidelity, which has a lot of donor advised funds as well nationally. They too have seen about a similar type of increase from donor advised funds. But overall, the conversations continue, and we continue to lift up things that are happening, and really appreciate the organizations that are posting on Give DSM, right? So that's another vehicle way to share. One quick question that that was asked, that Nikki and Connie, I'd just like your perspective on, what are some of those conversations or suggestions that you've made in terms of sharing with the board? Any ideas right now for the staff that are on this call about how they might be able to share with the board the need for engagement? Any good tips or tricks that perhaps you want to elaborate on for folks? It's always a question.
Well, I'll jump in first and then I'll let you chime in too, Connie. We've seen when boards get a regular update, it's their way, it's their kind of their lifeline to the organization. Because think about it, your board members are trying to fight whatever fires they have at work or at home. And so they might not always have your organization top of mind. But when you have that regular scheduled update, it's, oh, this is what happened at that organization this week. This is a COVID case that came up with their staff, or this is how they're pivoting, or the grant they found out about. And so when the executive director has that reminder to send out the note, it's a good way to keep that lifeline going, and to be really honest too, because they're going to see it on the financials, and so to keep them no surprises is really what we'd advise. Connie, do you want to add to that at all?
I would just add to be sure to emphasize always the impact they made before the pandemic and the impact they can continue to make during the pandemic. And even though they may need to shift a little bit, or as we said, refocus budget or refocus expectations, it's really all about community impact, and the community needs them more now than ever.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Bridget, if you could move forward to the next one. If you would like to continue to have conversation with Nikki and Connie this morning, they will be staying in the main room. There's certainly lots of tidbits that I've gathered, and we'll put in a summary to all of you, but some of my favorites in terms of annual fund: can't stop, won't stop. I think that's such a good thing that really sticks in your mind, Connie, so appreciate that. The idea really around timing and ensuring that we're not toned up to what's happening, but honest and authentic in our choices. And that Helen Keller quote, we're a sucker for quotes in the sector, but that Helen Keller quote about a bend in the road isn't the end of the road unless you fail to make the turn. I think that's something that certainly can resonate with many of us right now, and some have been turning and on a windy path for quite some time. So if you'd like additional conversation with Connie and Nikki, please stay in the main room. Otherwise, what we're going to ask you to do now is please take a moment, and in front of your name, if you go up to the right-hand side of your picture and you right-click, you can rename yourself. Please choose either 1 or 2, so put 1 or 2 in front of your name. Room 1 will be a peer-to-peer fundraising conversation. Again, Jenna Ekstrom with Greater Des Moines Habitat for Humanity is going to talk about ways that they've helped to leverage social media platforms and leverage their supporters to reach into additional circles to grow support for Habitat's work. A lot of cool ideas that they've implemented with their work. And then in room 2, some general fundraising pivots and a great conversation with Sonia Ash from the Young Women's Resource Center. Again, they are pivoting their gala event on Saturday to a virtual couch event. So would love to have a chance to talk to Sonia as they're in the midst of those pivots right now. So please go ahead and indicate 1 or 2 in front of your name. And then we will be zoomed out here in just a moment. I'm going to give folks a second to think through that. As you're making that change, please know at the end, we will come back again and just do a quick recap and reminder. July is going to look a little bit different for community circles. We will be off next week, and then we've got a pretty exciting series that will begin July 15th. So we'll talk just a little bit more about that. So I see most folks have indicated there. Bridget, let's go ahead and stop screen sharing here. And Barb, I'm going to ask you to help fly us all out, and then we'll see you all back here in just a moment. Enjoy your conversations, and thanks again to our breakout room hosts. Good morning, everyone. If you're staying in the main room, you're welcome to turn on your video. You're welcome to turn on your video if you didn't comb your hair. You're welcome to turn on your video. No matter what this morning, everybody.
We'd love to see your faces.
We would love it. Don't be fooled. I only combed my hair because Brienne's on vacation, right? So it's so good to see everybody. Hi, Amy and Matt.
Real to see some of you guys.
Hello. All right.
Dress you've got on too.
Good morning. Hi, Joe. Good morning. All right. Well, main room. Here we are. So this is really just an open, conversation, open opportunity to kind of ask Nikki and Connie any questions that you've got. Real quick, before I turn that over to the large group, just wanted to remind everyone if there's any requests that you'd like to submit for our adaptation grants. So those are due Friday at 4 o'clock. So please reach out to me. I'm happy to have a conversation via email or phone if you'd like. But any adaptation grant requests Friday at 4. So things like business planning or tools that you need because you've had to pivot something that you've done because of COVID. And we know that that's happening everywhere. But just let us know. Information's on our website. And then a quick heads up to you, on July 6th, so just in a few short weeks, which I can't believe it, we will be announcing a grant program for the remainder of the year called the Strategic Collaborations Grant Program, really focused on a couple of things. One, opportunities to fund collaborations of any type. It can be everything from mergers and alignments and elements like that, but it can also be other types of collaborations. It could be ways to bring organizations, projects and programs, leverage one another's skill sets. I mean, I almost hate to give examples because I don't want to limit that creativity that we know as so many of you have. And then there also will be an opportunity to that grant program to really look at ways to learn more about systems. So if there's something unique that you really think about systems changing, systems mapping, how could we do this all better within a whole ecosystem of our sector, in particular with a focus on equity. We'd love to learn more about what you're dreaming of. So you'll get more information July 6th, and I expect we'll have many, many conversations, and of course we'd love that. So just a quick heads up, and I'm sure we'll be in touch more. So I'm gonna stop talking now in the main room and give you all the floor to visit with Nikki and Connie and everyone else. So I'm gonna mute.
I had a question for you. I appreciate the regular communication and trying to keep the board engaged. how, and maybe it's different now, and maybe I'm just crabby this morning, but how do you actually, I know we were doing weekly board updates for a while and no one was reading them. And I only know that because I announced a pregnancy in it as a test to see if anyone was reading it. And since no one responded, I knew no one was reading it. So we haven't quite found, we want to keep people engaged, but I also don't want to spend 2 hours on a board report that no one's going to read if it's just falling into their inbox. So I don't know if you've seen any other methods that's maybe not email that could work.
Go ahead,
you wanna-
Connie. No, you go ahead.
Okay, so my suggestion, Aubrey, is that you reach out to your board chair and just say, you know, we're spending some time and energy trying to keep everybody updated, but we notice people aren't reading them. We feel like our efforts to engage are not succeeding as much as we want. And you're the board chair. Can you help me make this happen more effectively? And that may mean that the board chair has to pick up the phone and call a number of his board colleagues and say, you know, this is a critically important time. It really is important that we stay in tune to what the organization is doing. So that would be my first step, is to reach out to your board chair and say, help, how are we going to get the rest of the board members to read the emails, to get more engaged, to understand what's happening with our organization?
Mm-hmm. And then I'd also just add on, you've got a lot going on, right? So you don't have hours to spend on a board update with everything that you already know. So keep it really, really short. Here's the top 3 things that you need to know about Eat Greater Des Moines heading into the weekend. We applied for this grant, and that's going to be make or break for our budget. We're status quo on this, and I'm having a baby. Please read. But just
I'm not having a baby right now, but just so we know, last time it was my.
But really, what are those top 3 things that they need to know? Because yeah, we all are getting a lot of emails, and if it's like, okay, as a board member, this is what I need to, that's bite-sized, that also can help. But I love what Connie said too, getting your board chair involved.
I think anything that looks lengthy is something that people are going to put on the back burner and say, I'll try to get back to that later. So Nikki's point is very relevant. Bullet points help, and keeping it to top 3 helps.
Yep. I appreciate that. Yeah, I have a special folder for long emails that maybe will get read or not.
What else is on your mind today, everyone?
I have a question on the donor forums that you mentioned, and that's something we've been kicking around at ChildServe, is how would we launch those? Where would we send that out? Is, you know, where everybody's getting used to the Zoom, but could you guys, have you attended one of those? Have you coached any clients on hosting one of those? Do they need to be topical, or is the topic of the day just how we're doing? So could you go into a little bit more on that?
Connie, why don't you go ahead and start with this one?
I've attended several, and they've had different formats based on the organization. So sometimes they're very coronavirus specific and how it's impact the organization and what the organization is doing to respond. And others of them are more broad based on here's what the community is experiencing right now, and this is our response to that. So I think it's really unique to each organization, Erica. And if there is some special initiative, then I think that's really an important thing to emphasize, because we are getting quite a few invitations now for this kind of forum. And so you want yours to draw people in. And so again, the way that you propose the agenda for that or prioritize the things you want to discuss will make a difference, I think, in who steps forward to attend.
And also, if you are thinking about maybe just doing a major donor group, and then you can let them know that as well. We are inviting you, our major donors. This is exclusive. You know, so that way they see this isn't a communication that's going to everyone, and I'm really going to get some kind of an inside look here.
Connie, out of curiosity, with the ones that you've attended, what have the lengths been? How long have those donor forums
They
lasted?
have not been longer than an hour, and some of them have been more like 45 minutes. And I do think Zoom meetings do have a different level of engagement that people can really kind of lose interest after about 30 minutes. So I would say, again, try to keep it concise and relevant and not too much fluff information, if you will. I'd say an hour is a max, and 45 minutes might be better. But Nikki, how would you respond?
Agreed, exactly. And then also think about your donor base. They might not be the set that's been on Zoom calls all the time. So they might not have Zoom etiquette, if you will. So maybe do some ground rules at the beginning. And I know there have been organizations too that have handheld certain donors through the call. Emily is nodding right there, but it is really overwhelming for some donors who are not used to this. And so if you do see that one of those donors is hopping on, see how you can help them one-on-one, but then put those ground rules at the beginning too.
Anything else that's on your mind or that we could respond to?
I'm curious. So you mentioned good morning, by the way.
Good morning, Amy.
I am curious if, like, your guidance on how much to talk about COVID, especially for organizations like ours, where we're affected for sure, but we're certainly not a health organization or something like that. And there've been a couple of schools of thought with our board members, like, tell people, that we need their support because of this. And then there's the other, like, tell them we're continuing to move forward and don't focus on it too much. So if you found a good formula for that?
Well, positive messaging is always better than negative messaging. And so however you can report the information you want to report in the most positive vein possible is really optimal. I always remember in my early years of fundraising where I learned that people give to success, not distress. And I think it's really easy right now to paint a picture of distress, no matter what area of nonprofit work you're in. And so I think that goes back then to really emphasizing the impact that you're able to make during a really difficult time. If you're not directly related to COVID, like a healthcare system might be, or like a housing organization where people are not able to pay their rent payments and other things, then I think you take the broader, bigger picture, Amy. But I would remind everybody, and of course we want to be realistic, and of course we want to be honest, and of course we want to be transparent, but there are ways to say things in the most positive vein, and that's what I would encourage you to look for.
Thank you.
And even Amy, I mean, leadership, when I'm thinking about your organization in particular, we need leaders as we navigate tough times. And you are arming our community with smart, adaptable, collaborative leaders. And so, kind of like we touched on earlier, your donors are with you because they care about your organization. And so your mission is the same no matter what, and is important to our community no matter what. So how is your mission still important? We need leadership. We need food. We need our kids, to have great educations.
And then I would just piggyback on that, the comment that I made earlier in the presentation, which is the number one reason people discontinue support of a charitable organization is because they lost connection with that organization. So if you're in the midst of the pandemic and feel like I'm not really able to respond to crisis needs in the way some other organization might be, still don't stop communicating. They need to hear from you and remember that they believed in you and your mission, and you want them to continue to believe in you and your mission after. So don't lose contact, keep the engagement as much as possible. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Connie and Nikki, and Angie, maybe this is for you as well. Have you seen yet a trend towards short-term giving versus longer-term giving? So portfolios are down, personally, corporate, so on. So maybe people are thinking kind of short term to see what happens at the end of this. Or maybe people are saying, no, I need to fulfill my personal commitment to an organization. I'm just curious if we've seen any trends yet.
Mhm. I think it is early to give a trend for sure, but I would definitely say, Jane, that people are being cautious about any multi-year commitment right now. And so if they believe strongly in the organization, the donation is still there, but not so much that I will extend this donation for 3 or 4 years. That's true in corporate, and I think it's also true in individuals. So until the economy rebounds and people's portfolios feel a little bit more back to normal, I think that we will see that. That's a very good point.
I'd say kind of keeping that in mind, part of the challenge I think has been because it's so pivoty. I don't think that's a word, but I'm going to use it. Trying to best explain, because we don't know, I think of one of our programs, the produce drop, that we started because there was an opportunity, and now June 30th, that's going to change. And none of that was something that we knew before or after, or even, week by week. So how you just kind of put some of those things together to let funders know, because we don't know what's going to happen next month, or, so I think that's sometimes the challenge, is saying, we're trying to keep up with, here's, what we've seen and what the opportunities are, but trying to provide more details, even sometimes the budget of what are we going to have the expenses on, has been a challenge with over the last few months. And so while we want to keep people informed and engaged and keep it positive, I feel uncomfortable being I don't know all the time, and we're just trying to figure it out. So I don't know how that balance of, we're trying to take the, fill the gaps where we see them and the opportunities, but anticipating what those are has been real tricky.
Mm-hmm.
I would go back to what Nikki said earlier about authentic communication, and the fact that it's a-okay to say to your donors, this is the need we're trying to meet, but we're not sure what it's going to look like at this point. And if all the decisions aren't made yet, Aubrey, then I would encourage you to get their input and say, what do you think? And how do you think we could best meet this? So I think, just authentic communication, being honest, being transparent, and asking for input if you can. If decisions are already made or being made by somebody else and you can't really impact those decisions, then of course you don't want to ask for input that cannot be used. But those are thoughts that I have. Nikki, what would you say?
Yeah, I just think of all of our performing arts organizations in particular. They have no idea when they're coming back, right? And that impacts, the kids that are taking the lessons, and then also us enjoying performances. And I use Broadway as an example. Broadway's my barometer. And so Broadway said September, then they said January, now they're saying March. And so we've seen a lot of our performing arts organizations do some really great surveys. What would make you feel comfortable? And so that way you can use that, as Connie said, as it's applicable to doing that survey. But just know everyone understands the unknowns. But I think knowing that an organization is thinking through the scenarios, that's helpful. We know we have a lot of unknowns, but we're planning. We're planning plan A, plan B, and plan C, and we want to know what you think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, I'm looking at you with the performing arts. How are you doing?
I was just gonna say the same thing. I didn't want to call Matt out, but since Nikki did, I'm gonna call you out. I think you're breaking up, Matt.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're working on. Trying. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Matt, we called you out.
Performance of some sort.
Not easy to pivot, but we are looking at multiple scenario when we will. I wrote in all capital letters,
I'm not getting anything. Nikki, are you able to hear?
No, Matt.
Okay.
Is the chat box working?
Nothing.
I'm sorry, Matt. I couldn't tell if it was mine, but I'm not getting anything to come through. Do you want to type your answer or your question? How's this? Does this help?
Sorry
If
about that.
I could jump in on Matt's behalf if Matt doesn't mind. I'm president of the Iowa State Theater Company Board, so I thought that I didn't want to steal Matt's thunder on this at all, but he and I have been working really hard on this because of the change in performances, shifting from, like Nikki said, watching what the big guys are doing and when performances start in February or September, or what that all looks like. So surveying, working with austerity around what we do with our space, rehearsal space, and the things we do downtown. The board is talking frequently, almost I'd say every other day, in short email bursts in terms of making decisions about working with our landlord, working with the volunteers we have, our actors, our resident artist company. It takes a lot of communication to do this well, because we don't want people to disengage because they're at home and having to do things, in a disconnected way. So I think we're doing, I feel pretty proud of the board and Matt and the group in terms of making sure that we're making decisions urgently, and we're doing things that are smart for our donors. We're conserving resources. We're working with our partners. So I hope that that's a complete answer and similar to what Matt would have given, but I think it is performing arts. Who knows when we're going to go back? So it's very difficult to forecast that. So we're doing the best we can.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And I see too, Matt was saying we're getting pivoty, to use Aubrey's terminology, which I think we should all start using, and developing a virtual season. We have at least 2 scenarios for returning to performance at the Stoner. And, I think that probably, really leads into, Nikki, what you were talking about, there are so many unknowns, and we can do a lot of scenario planning. And I think just being able to meet the bend in the road whenever we get there is really important. But that was Matt's kind of feedback. And I'm sorry, Matt. I wish we could hear you, man. Okay. I think Barb's going to send a note here in just a minute, or is going to send out a note that will be called back here in 2 minutes. So any final questions or thoughts or feedback for the group that y'all have?
I might make one last comment about budgets for fundraising during this time. I think there can sometimes be an inclination to make some really significant budget cuts. And I like to describe it as work on your budget with a scalpel, not a hammer. Don't knock out really important resource positions, and be cognizant of the fact that your fundraising staff is helping your programs to be implemented and effective. And so if the budget is calling for a complete overhaul of the development staff, I'm not sure that's really a good strategy. And so try to remember that when budget's being impacted, sometimes program has to be impacted equally to what some people see as ancillary services like fund development, because you all are the ones that are really working hard to make sure the programs can continue to succeed and grow. So that's what I would say about budget, because probably budget's going to be on the forefront of a lot of organizations' mind for the next year or two.
I love that. Gosh, we could all have like 25 t-shirts by Connie with all of these amazing quotes and references. But I do love that. I think that's entirely true. I think the other thing is, now is really a good time to help talk about the value of the organization and general support. And you all do this all the time. But help remind those funders. I mean, we continue to try and talk about it, but remind the funders, remind the donors about how critical that unrestricted money is to allow you to pivot. So as much as you can lead with that first, from my perspective, has been really helpful as we share, ideas with individual donors and others too. So thanks, Nikki, and thanks, Connie. And so good to see all of you in the main room. I see our other friends are gathering back together again for our send-off for today. Bridget, can you put up that final slide just so that we can touch on that really quick before we say goodbye and send folks off for their Wednesday, which is just gorgeous. So I hope that you all have a chance to take a walk break at lunch, perhaps. So just a couple final things for this morning. Again, thank you so much for joining us. A huge thank you to our presenters this morning, Nikki Severson and Connie Isaacson. Got some great tidbits of information, even in our breakout group here. So I'll send out some additional comments and thoughts that they shared. Just a couple of reminders. If your organization is interested in applying for an adaptation grant through the Community Foundation, those are due Friday at 4 o'clock. Information's on our website. We'll include it in our follow-up email. But feel free to send me an email, give me a call, and I can talk through that if you have questions. Also, just a reminder about our schedule for community circles. Of course, next week we're taking a break. We are going to meet and reconvene back here again on Wednesday, July 8th, where we will have some roundtables, and more details will be coming out to all of you about that. But July 8th will be roundtable discussion time. And then we're really excited to have a series of events as part of our community circle conversations on July 15th, 22nd, and 29th. And we have the opportunity to have an organization called Up With Community is going to talk with all of us during that 3-week period around how you can strategize for equity for the long game. So it's a really exciting, unique opportunity for folks to come together to think about strategy, to think about how to move forward as an organization with that equity lens, which we know is critically important to all of our work. So please, if you'd like to be a part of that 3-session series, use the registration link that we'll send out because you'll need to kind of re-register to get back on for that set in July. So with that, again, thanks everyone. As always, we cannot express our gratitude enough to each of you and your organizations for what you do. You make our community strong, and we are just delighted, along with all the partners who help convene community circles, to have you working in our organization for such good things. So with that, have a wonderful Wednesday. Have a great 4th of July, and we'll see you back on the 8th. Have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.